Yes, John O'Connor. Thank you, Francis, and thank you, Geraldine. I have an overall question. How do we get our Catholic pride back? You might perhaps look at three areas there. The general Catholic community. You might also consider the Catholic pride in our parishes. And since this is a St Vincent de Paul occasion, let's have a look at our Catholic pride in the work that we do. I might mention our young Vincentians, for instance, and using your words, Francis, authenticity and relevancy. Our young Vincentians between the ages of 18 and 35, they feel absolutely inspired when they go out and do conference work. They love what they're doing. They're aligned with the gospel message, but they don't want to be told how to do it. So if you would like to address that, our pride, can we recapture that in some of those levels?
Well, if Claire's any example, as you say, when at work, as it were, as you say, there's an effortless pride, it seems to me, from people who are actively engaged. And that's what I've felt. That's what I said to Francis. These people are very engaged and there's a tremendous spirit there. So I don't see that, but I'm willing to be told I'm wrong, as an issue. I think the broader pride, and this is what I got looking overseas, and I think, Francis put it beautifully, that sort of sense of relevance and life, what is life-giving. We've just vacated that space in the general community. I mean, we just have. And, I really feel that the general community is the poorer for not having that input from us about what our tradition offers. And I have felt for quite a while, and I haven't won these arguments. I'm not saying I have, but I've gone out in all sorts of various addresses and so on, and I sort of try to say to people, what is suffered by the community for the loss of this confidence? Now, people like David Marr and so on, just look at you've got four heads sort of thing, that they just, I just don't think this will be properly computed for a while to come. See, I think this is sort of a real diminishment of the community because there's so little involvement. I wouldn't have called it Catholic pride so much. I mean, I know what you're getting at. It's just that sense of Catholic involvement, comfortably articulating some of these sort of values. And the lack of them is dreadful, The whole discussion around mercy, for instance, around charity, around sort of the sharing and all of the whole discussion around inequality and egalitarianism is suffering for the lack of the Catholic involvement. I feel that very powerfully, to be honest.
Well, just building on what Geraldine's saying, two things. Most people, Joe, Caddy and others who've all worked, Toby, all worked in the whole social services area of the church. People who work in that area, they often say the best kept secret is the Catholic social thought. And and yet what Geraldine's saying is dead right. We have a whole framework that can be applied to the macro shifts that are going on in this very challenging moment for the West. The Pope's trying to sort of jig that along as best he can, but we've got an articulated way of understanding how you balance a distribution of resources, how you side with disadvantage. You actively make those preferences. We have a strong intellectual foundation for how to do that. I'm very proud of that because I think we apply it as best we can, but we are sheepish about it to some degree because we're not quite sure we're right. Well, you don't have to be right, you can be correct. It's easier than being right. And I think it's again this thing about, we have one of the strongest things, a bloke on the phone to me today said, told me about his wife's just gone off to work, I won't say which other faith-based group, one of the others. And she's going to have this role in mission and stuff. And I said, isn't it interesting? She's going from a tradition where we have struggled in our tradition to give language to our faith, faith-seeking understanding, right? That's what we have developed. We come from a rich tradition which we continually try to apply. We should be very proud of this because we've held it together. Because intuitively know there's something right about it. And that is what I think we have an opportunity now to re-articulate both large and small environments.
But can I just, before we, that's where it's really countercultural, because at the moment, I think this is such an interesting point, because you have to reach in to talk about St. Irenaeus, what? And you tap into the wisdom of the ages, and it's just not the zeitgeist at the moment. But I reckon if done well, you start to foreshadow it. I think there is an appetite for people who confidently, not throw it in people's faces, but comfortably appear equipped with extra knowledge and serenity from knowing this, you see? So this is where it's exactly about not shrinking and actually knowing what it is that you can articulate. And then I think you subtly, slowly change the agenda.
Thank you. Diane. Can you get a microphone here to Diane?
I can speak without a microphone, if that's all right. Hi, I'm Diane Foley. I've been working in Catholic schools for 32 years. I graduated when I was 21 and I have been in schools all my life in Catholic system. I'm in the heart of the matter if you think about it, grey and green. Well, what I want to say is that a question I have received from one of my students is, how can the Catholic Church make itself more relevant for the young people of today?
Right.
I'll go first this time.
Good.
I'm not going to outsource the answer. You've got to think young. I don't know whether we think young. I don't know whether we actually respect what is evolving in young minds. I think we too quickly second guess them. I'm talking as a parent who's probably failed in this regard. But I honestly believe that God reveals in a less absolute way than I was taught. I think there are no absolutes. And I think we've got to sort of relax around that, particularly as people evolve in their, young people are evolving. People are getting critical about sort of fluidity and blah, blah, blah. I'm like, I think this is what faith is about. You trust. Faith is about a perspective which is positive and hopeful. People of faith don't look at the world and think it's going to decay. People of faith don't get scared about life. People of faith rejoice in seeing the gems in life. And I think that's an attitude that young people have and want, but they want to see it in our eyes. And oftentimes, when they look back at us, they see questioning in our eyes. And that's because I'm scared, not them.
Yeah, there's that, that great I think it's Pope Francis said in Gaudium and Spes, was it? You know, he wanted Catholics who had an Easter Sunday about them, not the Good Friday. You know, they were Good Friday. They never got out of Good Friday, sort of thing. And I thought that was terrible. You know, he wants joy. He wants exactly that comfortability amidst the doubt. I think there's tremendous desire for profundity, actually, in a lot of young people, really, that almost frightens my generation. And if you want to, you know, look at this Reddit and subreddits. And my son's 25 and I get a lot of this. And I think it's naming things too, you know. We watched Chernobyl. I don't know how many of you had a chance to watch Chernobyl yet, which is just so phenomenally good, which is the story. It's on, I don't know whether it's easy to get. Dare I say, I think he downloaded it illegally. Anyway, we watched it. No names, no pact rule, and it was just such nobility in there that when you get to see it, it is just the most phenomenal bit of television. The true story of the meltdown at Chernobyl in 1986, you know, and having just been to Russia, and I just so understand it more, you know, and because Soviet Union comes out of it appalling. As Sam said to me, the Soviet Union comes out of it very badly, the Russians come out of it very well. It was just so perfect, you know, and to watch it and to sort of say with a young person, that's nobility, you know, the divers who went into the fully radiated water because they were basically told, it has to be done. It has to be done. You know, they are very available, but we've got to go with them. I quite agree with you. I quite agree. We've got to lift ourselves to go with them.
There is a young person who put their hand up.
Oh, right.
Back there, who would like to ask a question. Thank you.
Thank you very much. My name's Philippa, and I just wanted to pick up on the point about reclaiming Catholic pride, and just wanted to share that I've really grappled with this both in my personal and professional life. I work for a Catholic organisation. And at the moment I've landed on, if we can properly acknowledge the wound and sit within it and not shirk responsibility, then we can reclaim the pride. And I've experienced just this morning the real privilege of leading some leaders in our organisation in the story of the Good Samaritan, and felt so set free to share that story with them, because I started by acknowledging that there are many people in the church, and I said, this is the tradition that I'm drawing on this morning, who have not upheld the values that they should have. And I said, I hope that through this story that I share with you, you will see the values that are supposed to be upheld when the church is at its best. So I think that maybe we need to do some more thinking about how to properly acknowledge, and I know that I'm thinking about that in my professional context. And interestingly, in the question about young people and why have young people left, I found myself thinking they never came in the first place. And I feel so lucky that I was caught. I was caught by a Jesuit youth ministry, and I wouldn't be standing here today if that wasn't the case. So I think if we're real, if we are relevant, if we sit in the wound and we say, we stuffed up, and let's claim that pride, then I think we can move forward shoulder to shoulder with the bishops.
No, the chap on the table.
There, the man in the red jumper.
You've acknowledged that good leadership is very important. And I'd like to put a paradoxical point to you that, in fact, bad leadership can be a great opportunity.
Right.
I'll give you two examples from my early experience as a student. In psychology in La Trobe Uni, there was a terrible lecturer. She was first year out. She was extremely unconfident. Her lectures were dreadful. Everybody judged her to be the worst of the worst. But when the results came out, her subject was the highest rated in terms of the students. And the explanation was that we all thought we understood what the leaders or the lecturers told us. When when in fact we didn't. The poor lecturer made us go back to the books and really study and try to understand what the hell she's trying to tell us.
Yes,
So that's example number one.
yes.
Example number two, which is it was a social group. It was a Catholic 20s club. And we had always an election for the president and the committee and so on. And this particular year, we elected the worst president in the world. He had no charisma, he had no leadership, he had no idea what to do, etc., but he was the president because no one else stood up. But the committee got around it, saying, what is our specific role? What do I have to do to make this club succeed? And we committed to that. So even though the leader was potentially ineffective, he was a good chair of the meeting, fine. All of us did our homework and did what we should do to make sure that the club succeeded. So we had the greatest number of people joining it, we had the greatest events, we had the most money, etc., etc. So for a very short time, it was an example that if all of us get together about what we're supposed to be on about, we can make a difference. If you leave it to the leader, you're going down the tubes.
Look, yeah, that's a... The only thing is that is very exhausting, having just been through a certain episode in the ABC's life. There's no doubt that when people have to hang on for grim death and it all comes down, and you do, and you see true nobility, but it's terribly exhausting. And I do think actually it robs the place of creativity. It's a short term. I totally accept what you say, but I don't advise it.
Another question.
It was.
Yeah, I know, but I was just trying to avoid the councillor for the moment.
Thank you, Julie.
David.
Thanks, Brendan. In terms of reclaiming lay leadership in the Catholic sector, I think it's important that we celebrate what we already have. And I know that Geraldine and Francis both know that we have new PJPs, public juridic persons, that are running the major health entities in the Catholic sector, but a lot of lay people are unaware of that. And in fact, a lot of our clergy are quite ignorant of how lay people have moved into this sector. So, largely led by female congregations, if we have a look at Calvary Health, Mercy Health, St Vincent's Health, we'll see that not only do we have boards with lay-led people and highly skilled and gender equity on those boards, but we have trustees that have taken the place of congregational members who oversee those boards but don't interfere in the running of the entities. It's been extremely well done. The same is occurring in education. Now I look tonight and I see St Vincent's here, Vinnie's, and if we think about that in terms of lay-led leadership in the church, this is one of the first organisations worldwide in our church where there was lay-led leadership. Let's turn the clock back 20 years. How many females are in senior roles? Look tonight. Claire stood up in front of everyone, a 35-year-old female. If we're not celebrating tonight, there's something wrong.
Good point. Good point.
Has anyone got a question specifically for Francis or Geraldine?
Oh, not at the back.
We'll get that. I'll make sure.
Where's Shane?
Yeah, he's sitting completely in the front.
Because of my eyesight, Shane.
I think Brendan needs the exercise more. My question is for Francis. I like the idea of standing side by side and facing the same direction, but one of the blockers to this seems to be unfinished business. Do you think the recommendations from the Truth and Justice Council will ever lead towards healing and the light of day?
Two things. Firstly, I just want to pick up David's point. I will answer the question. David's point about, women in leadership roles. It's great. Virginia Burke's here and she's the chair of Mercy Health and Aged Care here in Victoria. A competent woman leading one of the bigger Catholic health ministries in the country, and yet probably outside of the intimate network, few would know. And that's another example of the fact that lay people are doing it for themselves. That's our point. So going to the Truth, Justice and Healing Council recommendations, I think the bishops and the religious leaders were in no frame of mind to receive them. I think they were too numb after what they had been through, let alone anybody else, and to have the emotional energy to know how to deal with them. That's the first point. Now, I'm thinking about this now from a distance. There are many things in those recommendations that would stimulate, I think, reasonable change in the way the church works. But my sense is there's been a retreat, particularly at the diocesan levels, a regrouping, a re-establishing of old power structures, a quite active narrative to say we've got through that now, let's talk about the positive. And I'm all for talking about the positive, but I think we have to listen hard to what it was telling us about ourselves. And I think there's been quite an active, I think the bishops are too divided. I think they're falling into camps. I think, as always, people confuse ideology for faith. I think that's a big thing we've all got to think about. You can easily get ideological. That's not faith. That's just a set of ideas. And I think, unfortunately, the culture wars that can happen are still alive and well. And we demonise people accordingly. Now, if you say stuff, you're a dissenter, for God's sake. Well, soon there won't be anything to dissent from. So I think it's terribly important that we have the conversations and we have them in a way in which we're saying we want to have unity. And let's open up the Truth, Justice and Healing Council recommendations. It's a 1,000-page report. And there were great recommendations about send this to this group to do that, this group to do that. And I think the only one that looks like it's having any impact is there's a review about governance structures, but my hunch is that review will be nobbled by bishops who say, well, under canon law, it's my gig. So, canon law is that thing, the old snake oil, that you can bring out when you need to. The real thing about canon law is it's meant to reflect a theology, an understanding about church. It's not just a prescribed set of rules. But when you want to control things, you make it legalistic. Canon laws are meant to be an expression of how our church works. It's meant to be based in the heart, not the head. But you'll find that reactionary people will use canon law for the status quo.
Thank you. I do need to say that it's nearly time to wrap up, and I know we could be here for a very long time. Francis has got a 6 a.m. flight in the morning and Geraldine's got one not long after. So I genuinely want to ask your permission to say no more questions and a couple of final comments from Geraldine and Francis, right on topic. May I have that, because I know there's a number of people in the room who are going, bloody Julie Fuster, she didn't give me the bloody thing and she ignored me.
This poor lady.
So can we say that? Can we sort of do a kind of a wrap-up? Thank you. I would like to wrap it up and invite you. I've heard you do this a number of times, Geraldine.
Have you?
You've only got 30 seconds, you lot, on the panel. You know how she does all that? You've only got 30 seconds to wrap up. Well, you don't. You have a minute. But I do want to say, though, we're here because of Frederick Ozanam, the Ozanam conversation, And one of my favourite sayings, which I think in a way encapsulates something of tonight, is that he said that, and I'm taking a little out of context, but I think most of you will get the drift. It's behind Geraldine and Francis. Yours must be a work of love. Not just the work, but our being, our Catholic being. Yours must be a work of love. You give of yourselves, you give of your time, your talents, and yourselves. And that's what Francis and Geraldine have done with us tonight. And that's what they're calling us to do in a broader, deeper, contemplative, non-shrinking, wounded way. So I would like to ask them to just wrap up. I'd actually really like to ask them the question, can you name 3 other people in the public domain who we know their names of, like Geraldine Doogue, like Francis Sullivan, who actually are stand-up and out there proud Catholics, who are actually influencing? That's what I'd like to ask, but I've told you can't ask it, so maybe I don't have to answer it. But can you sum up, a minute each, what do you want to leave us with? And where is your hope?
Go on, you can go first. There you go.
Well, I'm going to do it a different way because I feel it's important for me to do this. I went and walked the Camino after my job, and I did the full 900 Ks. Yeah, I reckon. I'm such a tart. And I carried with me one of the final reports of the Royal Commission in my backpack. And it was the one that had all the statistics of the Catholic Church in there. So I kept it in my backpack for the 40 days. And I want to read you my diary. Tomorrow I enter the cathedral in Santiago. I know that I will be feeling many things. Amongst them will be my journey over these nearly 6 years with the scandal of clerical abuse. In my backpack I have a copy of the official report of sexual abuse within the Catholic Church. It was not a burden to carry, more an obligation. The members and staff of the council went out of their way to assist victims to have their stories told and hopefully heard. I thought it appropriate that this report, which contains the statistics of these stories, be laid within the cathedral in a place of significance for the Catholic world, a place of prominence. The lives of those abused is now the catalyst for change in my church. The scandal can bring renewal and must deliver atonement. I hope this gesture will be seen in that light. So then I did it, and they don't let you get around the cathedral very easily, and so I didn't know where to put them. You know, everywhere I wanted to do it, they were thinking, But when you go there, everyone goes up to the statue and kisses it and holds it and stuff like that, which I didn't want to do. So downstairs in the crypt are where the bones of the said St. James lay. And they're behind these bars. And I thought, so I get it, threw it through, and it dropped face up. And I took the money shot and ran out. I'll just do the last bit. And I'll just take another minute, because this is important to me. And then I wrote a poem. So I will finish with this. I called it Dedication. And you can tell I stopped sometime at high school with my poetry. So, as a wreath, these names I lay, remembered as prophets, not prey. Muted cries now loud and far, scandalise abuse of power. Lightly laid, no exhausted thump. Proud to serve and stand beside courageous souls, though some have died. Resolute for truth to tell beyond complicity and denial. Too many this private hell for decency to resile. Here they lay as votive flames. Virtue moans without redress. Incensed embers, these precious names, struck for justice to impress. Thanks very much.
Well, I won't be as eloquent as that. I never get past the Matthew, I have come to bring you life and bring it in abundance. I find this just the most inviting words. And I think it's been true for me. And that, if I say I have to dig deep, I think that has been true. And yet that's certainly not the general picture that is given. It's almost like we've come to rob you of life. And it's just not true for me. And so that's what how I want to enrich us and invite others in. I think there is so much robbing people of hope. And I actually believe it is there. And somehow or other, I still think that it's that invitation to live fully in abundance. It's such a wonderful word that I think, so very much an Easter Sunday word as opposed to a Good Friday word. And somehow we've got to show that we mean it. You won't, if you want to be authentic and authoritative, it's got to come from you. So that's where the energy goes, and that's what I would offer.